Hi everyone, it's Lindsay and I am back today with an after Christmas thank you card set. Now this card set I wanted to make very easy to do in bulk as well as make it very simple and easy to mail. Now you can dress these up as much as you want to, but for now I'm just going to show you how I did my basic card. So I'm using the background basic line stamp. This is from Inspired by Stamping. And I have two of the stamps already loaded onto my acrylic block. I'm using the medium width solid line stamp that's in the set, and I'm also using the thinnest 4-line stamp that is in that set. I've also got 4 pieces of cardstock cut. 2 are white, 2 are craft. They all measure 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I will be using a dark red dye ink as well as a dark green dye ink, but you can switch this up and make them customized to whatever kind of Christmas colors or theme you're going with for this particular year. So I'm starting off with these stamps, and I want to show you how I get these straight on my acrylic block. So I'm just going to put it down on my craft mat here, and then I'll use my ruler and kind of push it up against there until it gets stuck, and then I know these are straight. I can go ahead and use my acrylic block, just pick it up from there, and now it is completely straight on my acrylic block. I'll do the same thing with this one, just bump it up against that ruler edge, and then pick it up with my acrylic block, and it's ready to go. Now this one did get messed up a little bit. That's okay. I can just take it right back off, push it up against the ruler again, and pick it up again with my acrylic block. You can do it as many times as you need to until it gets straight on your block. Because these are such simple cards, you do want to make sure that the things you do, you put a little extra effort into these. So for my stamping surface, I'm using a piece of fun foam. This is just from the kids section at your craft store. And then I'm also going to lay a piece of computer paper over the top of that just to catch the extra ink from the edges. Now I've got my stamps loaded on my block all ready to go, and I'm starting off with a piece of white cardstock and the dark red dye ink. Now by all means, change up your colors, change up the color of your cardstock if you want to. You can even mix and match the lines from the stamp set to create a fun background as well. But what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and turn my cardstock, and I'm going to stamp these at an angle. I'm going to start in the bottom left corner, and right now I was just kind of trying to figure out how I wanted to do this. What I want to do is make a candy cane stripe. So I thought the best way to go about doing that was start in an angle. So I'm starting on the bottom left-hand corner, and I am just stamping this down at an angle. Now I'll go ahead and re-ink up this stamp, and you can see that fun foam underneath this when I'm stamping down helps to give me such a solid line stamp. Now these are a little tricky to work with, these kind of solid stamps that I am using. However, that fun foam just really helps underneath. So I'll go ahead and line this stamp up again at an angle and try to make it as even as possible from the stamp set before, and then I'll just continue to stamp this way. Now eventually, stamping like this, you are going to hit a spot where your stamp doesn't reach all the way across the paper. But the great thing about these clear stamps is I can look straight through it, I can line this up and stamp it down. Now it doesn't have to be completely perfect, and you do see more of a difference in the ink right now, but these are the kinds of inks that as they dry, they become more even and just kind of settle into the paper a little bit better. So it looks a little splotchy right now. However, once this dries, you won't be able to notice as much. So I finished off that one, and I also did a craft cardstock with the same exact stamp, same exact pattern, but this time I used my green ink for this one. Here I've got both of these ready to go onto a card base, but I'm going to set those off to the side and do a little bit of a different pattern now on this next piece of craft cardstock. So I started off the same exact way and stamped down my first stamp in the bottom left hand corner with dark green dye ink. But now I'm going to pull out it's the skinniest of the solid line stamps in that stamp set, and I'm going to ink this up with my red dye ink after I've loaded it on to my acrylic block. I'll go ahead and put this at an angle, and then I'll just stamp it down right next to that. Now for my next stamp, I'm going to go ahead and flip this around so I've got my stripes first and then my solid line next. So it's kind of a pattern here that I'm going with. And if you're having trouble coming up with kind of a candy cane pattern or colors, you can just Google this or go to Pinterest and look at different patterns. I was surprised at how many different ways you could stamp out a candy cane pattern. So just Google search it and pick the one that appeals to you. So I went ahead and stamped this next stamp down, and again, this isn't going to reach all the way across, so I do need to go ahead and fill that in right at the top. I'll line it up as best I can and stamp it down, and those inks will settle down and flatten out a little bit as they settle into the paper. Once I had stamped that twice, I went ahead and stamped my red line next, and then I'll go back and I'll do my solid line first up against that red line again. So I'm just kind of switching back and forth here. Now I continued to do this until I had my entire craft cardstock filled up with stripes here. And you can see some of these stamps aren't stamping as clear as I would like them to, but once I get on this sentiment panel, and also I'll do a scallop panel on there as well, it's not going to be as noticeable. Now if I do have any places like that where it just completely misses, I just go back in and fix that really quickly. So there is that finished pattern, and now I'm going to move on to my last one, which is on a white piece of cardstock, and I'm going to start off with my red dye ink. Now for this one, I'm going to keep it very simple and very similar to my last pattern, but it's just a little bit different. I'm going to add in more green on this one. So I'm going to ink up my stamp with that red dye ink first and stamp it just like I have been starting off in the bottom left hand corner at an angle. So I'll ink up that stamp very well. You want to make sure that you ink up your stamps really well, especially for this technique. And then I'll flip this over and I'll go ahead and stamp that thinnest line in green. Now I'm going to go back in and I'm going to stamp again with red, but this time I'm going to go ahead and make sure that that solid line is first. Then I'll stamp with my green again. This didn't stamp all the way across, so I'll go back in and fill in on the bottom and the top of that line as well with that green ink. And then I'll flip this right back over, and that's the great thing about having the stamps on both sides. I'm not switching acrylic blocks as much. I just flip them over and go from there. This time I went ahead and stamped the stripe line first. I'll fill in that top portion where it didn't stamp all the way across. And then I'll come back in with that green ink. So I'm just switching from my red to my green more often with this one, just to add in a few more colors and make it a little bit more festive. The great thing about using these stamps and kind of spacing them out so much too is it doesn't require a whole lot of stamping to fill up an entire panel. So you can see I've got just one more stamp to do, and then I'm moving on to my sentiment. Now I cut out just a white rectangle with the die, and I just stamped the Sending a Note of Thanks from the Sending You stamp set. That is also from Inspired by Stamping. The links will be over on my blog. And I stamped that in black dye ink onto that rectangle with my Misty, so I could just go from one rectangle to the next without changing the placement of my sentiment. Now I went ahead and I'm going to do this kind of like an assembly style. However, I'm going to put together a whole card first and then move on to my next one. So I put down that candy cane pattern paper that I stamped out with some fun foam and double-sided adhesive. I've got my sentiment white rectangle, and I'm going to pop that onto a scallop rectangle that is slightly larger than the sentiment rectangle, and this is cut out from green. Because I'm using the green candy cane stripe, I'm going to go ahead and put green cardstock with it. I have double-sided adhesive on the back of it, peel the backing paper off, and place that right down on top in the center of that card base. Now these card bases are all A2 size white card bases, and I have them folded, I guess it's a side fold, but I've got them in landscape, so I'm using them where the longest is on the top, or my fold is on the top. And the rest of these cards are going to go together the same. The only thing I'm changing up is the scalloped rectangle. Some I'm using green, some I'm using red. It's just a matter of preference at this point. So I'll just finish putting these together, and this goes together very quickly. This whole card set of 4 cards, all the stamping, took me about 40 minutes to make, so not too bad. I'll just finish up this last card, and on this one I did cut the fun foam a little bit too large, so I'll just use my long blade scissors to trim that up so it doesn't show through. I'll press that onto my card base. I'll load up my sentiment rectangle onto my scallop rectangle, and then place that right down in the center of the card, and that finishes off the card set. I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I hope I've inspired you to make a thank you card set, whether you send it out for yourself or you give this as a gift for someone who may need it. It's a great way to make a lot of cards at one time without spending too much time. As always, I will leave you guys with this close-up of the cards and just a few finished pictures. For more information and the supply list, you can head over to my blog. I will leave the exact link to this blog post in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for watching today, and happy crafting!